So welcome back to 3rd Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to the second of the two battles that the Womb Raider has recently sent me of these little preview battles again that we're going to be seeing on the new patch. And this time we're going to be in the entryway, shall we say, to the mountains of GUNDABAD, and we're going to be seeing the orcs on the defence today, which is rare enough an occurrence even in the current version of the game, which has been around for a while now, but in the new patch I don't think we've seen evil on the defence too often, at least not a purely orc-focused evil defence. We have recently seen Rudour defend their own capital after all, but on this occasion we're going to be seeing no human-based factions on the field at all. I think we're going to be seeing an entirely orcish versus dwarven affair, and the dwarves are going to be on the attack. So taking a cursory glance over this settlement, it's rather similar to the last battle that we saw from the Womb Raider in the sense that it is kind of a cityscape focused affair with a sort of winding labyrinthine look in behind it, with a few structures here and there, plenty of terrain for the orcs to take advantage of as well. So as far as the map goes, it is reasonably good ground to defend. There's a few more wide open areas of course, but the orcs as well with their numbers can be fairly effective at dealing with such things. But the dwarves of course do have quality on their side, so let's go ahead and see what the dwarves have at their disposal as Discord continues pinging away at literally the worst available time. I've been on my PC for about 4 hours now, getting ready for doing that, or well, ever since the morning my PC's been on for about 4 hours, and of course right now is the moment when someone decides to get in touch with me via Discord. We shall do our best to ignore such things for the time being. Anyway, we have the Warlord here who's going to be playing as the dwarves of the Blue Mountain, so Ered, Luin, a new faction of course on the battlefields of Middle-earth as we will be viewing them. We've only seen them properly once before. We have seen them in a field battle as well, though that was a very short and sweet affair indeed when we first saw them. But Ered, Luin, in comparison to the other dwarven factions, do actually lack a little bit of the bulk of the other dwarven factions. Of course, relative to many other factions, they're still going to be very, very strong with regards to their heavy infantry, but there is a little bit more of an emphasis on some of the ranged support tools that they can bring to bear at their disposal. They've got a little bit better of an archer corps at their disposal, which can be used for long-range skirmishing. They've got some very interesting, unique projectiles as well. And all of those things do really add up, and usually you would associate that with the dwarves on the defence, but also on the attack here it could be really useful for dealing with some of the very obvious strengths that we've seen the orcs already have in this new version of the game. Warriors of the Blue Mountains are a relatively basic unit of dwarven infantry, but of course, as we've said time and time again throughout pretty much every iteration of 3rd Age, 3rd Age Reforged, and any other Middle-earth focused Medieval 2 Total War mods, this kind of unit has always been pretty damn effective, and of course wielding an axe as they do, that little bit of extra damage is going to be very useful at carving their way through the basic orcish units. A couple of units of Guardians of the Blue Mountains here of course with their javelins, and then as most heavier dwarven units are, they're also going to be a little bit bulkier when it comes to their melee prowess as well. Of course not as much perhaps as Erebor and Khazad-dûm, but still enough to the point where they're still going to be able to fill that role. But the javelins are going to be very useful here against the slightly heftier units that the orcs do have at their disposal. We've got some unlocalized placement text here, which kind of upper tier dual wielding units. This 68 per unit, well, a bodyguard unit really, of course, a dual wielding axe unit. I don't know if they're armor piercing or not, I must be honest. Generally speaking, dual wielding axes are not actually armor piercing. They do have very high base damage and very high melee defense. I would imagine they're along the same sort of lines as the Obsidian Guard in that regard, but the factor of armour piercing of course is a big one with regards to a unit like that. Frostspears of Azaghal are kind of a very unique unit really. They're bolt throwers really in terms of what they are functionally. Their projectiles actually mimic a little bit the Witches of Angmar, though of course they do lack the at least the initial arc of their projectiles mimic the Witches of Angmar. They do lack, of course, the devastation that the Witches can inflict upon their enemies, but I don't know if any of you have used handgunners from the medieval 1212 mod for Attila, but maybe in terms of rate of fire it's a little bit similar to that. They're a very unique kind of unit, and they can be very, very useful for breaking up defensive blocks of infantry, which of course on this map they're very likely to run into. We have the High Thanes of Azaghal, a bodyguard tier javelin and infantry unit, a very useful combination again for the same reasons. Obviously, we've already mentioned Ered Luin's proficiency with regards to their ranged units, and if the orcs are a little bit too defensive, get a little bit too comfortable in formation, Ered Luin have got all the tools in the world to be able to prize them apart. The Spear Guard of Thorin's Halls, however, are a much more straightforward unit, a unit of heavy upper end spears, or upper mid-tier spears I guess you could say. You can blanket your line with them, but it is quite expensive, but they are a very, very resilient unit indeed. And spears ultimately are a useful anti-cavalry tool as well, because it's not beyond the realms of possibility that even the orcs could choose for a mass cavalry sally out. We've got some marksmen of Thorin's Halls we already mentioned as well, the fact that they can get involved in skirmish fighting, and the marksmen of Thorin's Halls are the main vector by which the Blue Mountains do that. Very good armour, they're going to be able to trade back and forth with many an accomplished archer unit which is known for this sort of warfare already in the game. Though the orcs, especially Angmar and the Misty Mountains, which I believe are the combination of defenders we're going to be looking at today, neither of those two are particularly good at long-range skirmishing over a longer period of time against units of this quality level anyway. And then several units of Wardens of Thorin's Halls as well, which again lack that shield. They do trade that in for an extra weapon. As long as they don't come under too much ranged fire, that will be to their benefit overall in melee against the orcish units that they will find themselves facing off against, but we'll have to wait and see on that count. The Kingdom Under the Mountain, hidden playing as them, of course, Erebor, as we have seen, they were involved in the last battle as well, albeit on the defence. This time around they're going to try their hand at being the attackers. Ironfoot Warriors with the armour upgrade, very similar to the basic units that we've already seen from Ered Luin, although Erebor are much more straightforward dwarven faction in the sense that they do prioritise that heavy infantry, and the only real support they have is crossbows. So they're a relatively simplistic faction in that regard, but the nuances of their infantry are really where their importance can be gleaned. We have got some Ironfoot Hammerguard in here as well, which is going to be useful. I mean, I was a little bit worried, I must say, about the potential for a cavalry sally out, but something like the Ironfoot Hammerguard makes that much less likely to work out for the defenders, even with the numbers the orcs do bring to the table, those big armour-piercing blows that the Hammerguard can rain down. Erebor Legionaries are here as well, obviously an upper-end unit of line infantry. Quality-wise, they're easily going to have the beating of the regular rank-and-file orcs, which, of course, efficiency for the attackers is key, and as long as they can surround them with the appropriate support, they should do very well. And Ironfoot Axler as well, another throwing projectile unit. We only saw javelins from the Blue Mountains over on this side of the field, but Axe Thrower is adding in yet another dimension to the supporting units that the attackers are clearly going to send around this flank. The rest of Hidden's army, we have more Erebor Legionaries. Just in behind we have yet more Axe Throwers. We have the high tier unit of shock infantry that the Kingdom Under the Mountain traffic in, and that's the Sons of Durin. Exactly the kind of unit which will be very useful, especially against Angmar, I must say. Armour piercing is very important against Angmar. It's one of the main ways in which they're able to bludgeon their enemies down, is the armour allows them to stay alive long enough for them to do that. If you have enough armour piercing, however, that becomes less of a concern. The Sons of Durin can certainly help with that, as can the Ironfoot crossbows, though positioning is going to be important here, and crossbows, especially with how much elevation is involved in this settlement. I don't know how the Ironfoot crossbows are going to get on, but we shall see. We've got some Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin as well, more armour-piercing damage in melee. Obviously, bodyguard tier dwarven units are always going to be able to defeat their equivalent orcish foe, but it's rarely one-to-one when you consider such things. So, an important unit, but they can't rely on them solely. Many a dwarven player has fallen foul of that in the past. Ironfoot Pikes with their shields, relatively basic as far as what pikes can do in melee go, but that shield does make a big difference to their survivability at range, and of course the orcish arrow damage is relatively low anyway. We have more Ironfoot Warriors, more Ironfoot Crossbows, more Ironfoot Warriors and Pikes. We also have some more Sons of Durin, another bodyguard unit in the Obsidian Guard as well. We already briefly mentioned, of course, the Blue Mountains variant of this kind of unit, the Obsidian Guard here, filling the same role for Erebor, and another unit of Ironfoot Pikes. Moving on to the second Erebor army, played by Excalibur. We have plenty of Ironfoot Pikes on the front line ready to move forward, and it's actually a good thing they were on the front line, because straight away you can see there's some mounted units from Medexa, so at the very least it'll stop the cavalry from barreling straight into them. We have some more Ironfoot Crossbows, some more Ironfoot Warriors, a couple more units of them. Obsidian Guard here, we've got some Ironfoot Axe Throwers as well, ready to throw their payloads also. Erebor Legionaries, of course. The quality of the Erebor Legionary is going to be very important here in the central lane, I feel. And some Sons of Durin as well, to add that extra armour-piercing heft. and more Dragon Slayers as well. So a very similar army, if not exactly the same. Proportions of some units might be slightly different, with pikes and crossbows heading across to support this side as well, which I imagine is going to be, yes, yet another Blue Mountains army under the command of Tommy. Good to see him as well. Some Spear Guard of Thorin's Hall, so again, those upper end spear units acting as the front line, going to be a little bit more difficult for any cavalry to come forward. Some more Frost Spears. The Frost Spears we saw when Ered Luin were attempting to defend their own land were very important. We shall see if that's going to be the case here as well. I like the fact that their projectile thrower is kind of combined with an axe, and it gives it a sort of dual weapon, which is pretty cool. Marksmen of Thorin's Halls ready to open up on the enemy immediately as well. More warriors of the Blue Mountains filling that basic role of infantry, which is going to be important. The attackers ultimately do need numbers of some sort so that they can really put the defenders to task. Several units of wardens. We've got some stone hewers as well, which of course is the shock infantry variant. Armour piercing is never going to go to waste against the likes of orcs that the defenders are today. More guardians of the Blue Mountains, and then there's also another force over here with guardians of the Blue Mountains, some unlocalized placement text, some spear guard, more stone hewers, and there's also some frost spears as well. I don't know where these guys are going. Marksmen of Thorin's Halls, they're not going to go. Well, actually, they can go around this way. There is another route that can be taken, but let's move on to the defenders then, shall we? Starting off with Hertu Mihai playing as Angmar, the faction that everyone loves to hate. Barrow Wights are hidden in and amongst this unit of Angmar halberds. That's a fairly potent front line. The Angmar halberds, outside of any pikes or projectiles, should actually be a reasonable anchor against even the quality that the dwarves have because of that armor-piercing bite that they do provide in melee, though the Barrow Wights are going to be very important to them to try and really bulk up that defence. A couple of units of Witch Realm Scourge Raiders. We already mentioned the anti-cavalry melee tools that the attackers have today, but it is also worth mentioning the projectiles that Ered Luin and Erebor both have can be really good at zoning out cavalry, so while they can be used to hit and run these mounted throwing axemen, Micro is going to have to be on point, otherwise they could prove to be a waste, and we've seen defensive cavalry that has been wasted before really cost the defenders as the battle goes on. Meanwhile, we also have some Witch Realm Pikemen and Gundabad Guard over here, a bit more of a hefty front line in a more traditional sense, in the sense you've got the added range of the pikes and you've got the added bulk of those spears in comparison to the hit point heavy Barrow Wights, though lightweight, and then the Angmar halberds, of course, a little bit more thin on the ground. The Trolls of Angmar may be a little bit controversial in terms of how well they performed against the defenders at Fornos. We shall see if they can defend their own land with as much vigour. Of course, the dwarves will be vulnerable to the attacks that the Trolls dish out, but the reverse is also true in many cases with how damaging the Dwarven armour-piercing units can be in particular. Gundabad Guard and Witch Realm Pikemen back here. And we've also got the Witch Realm Hammer Guard, which far and away Angmar's best individual unit against the dwarves, given the heavy armour-piercing damage that they can inflict. Moving hastily on then to this central position, we have Medexa, we have got some Guardians of Khan Doom with the armour upgrade. Under normal circumstances, Angmar, of course, can rely on their heft. Numbers-wise, they may still be able to do that, but it is a little bit riskier against the quality and the armour-piercing that the dwarves do bring to bear, especially given the level of support that Erebor and Ered Luin can bring to the table. Snagar archers are hidden, so they're not completely foregoing archers, but of course a skirmish fight is going to be heavily dependent on how well they can position themselves. Another huge blob of trolls. It's very obvious that this is the meta already. Again, I really hope the trolls perform poorly in this battle, because I know they can, and it's obviously doing no one any favours if they have an absolute field day once again, but we'll see. Gundabad Guard, Angmar halberds and Barrow Wights are in there. We've also got some Witch Realm Hammer Guard, more cavalry all ready to charge into the dwarves, but again it's Scourge Raiders, the same problem applies here. Crossbows will be ready to meet their advance, and then we have Winged Swordsmen playing as the Orcs of the Misty Mountains. Moria Spear Guard are here. Of course the Goblins tend to be even more numbers focused than their Angmarim allies today. Moria Spear Guard will be hoping to bank upon the front line and really give the dwarves what for with those numbers. Just in behind them we have the Crawlers, so a unit of very low end fodder in every sense of the word, but again, not too surprising to see that sort of thing from the Goblins. We've got the Drake Broodlings, the living battering ram that they are. I don't believe they've undergone any drastic changes, maybe in terms of hit points and melee stats, but in terms of function you're going to be seeing them do very much the same sorts of thing. Cave Trolls are of course weaker trolls individually in melee, but there are plenty of them, and Trolls, of course, are again. I really hope the trolls don't dominate in this battle. I really don't, because I don't want to have to deal with the comments section if they do. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe it's a matter for debate, but we'll have to see based on this this battle replay, I guess, to see whether that debate needs to be had. Blackback Berserkers, with the damage that they have. The Snow Trolls in here, however, are the heftier unit of trolls that the Misty Mountains do have at their disposal, and they're much more in line with the Trolls of Angmar that we've already seen. Goblin Infantry, Mountain Orc Berserkers for some extra armour piercing, there's some Halberds in there also, and some more Snaga Skirmishers up high. And then last, but by no means least, hidden in and amongst the trees over here, we have the Wound Raider himself, who sent me this battle replay, so big thank you to him. Some standard Warg Riders, which will be rushing forth again. Similar story here, there are plenty of tools that the attackers can use to zone cavalry out. And we'll just have to wait and see if they can do the business. We've got some Crawlers crawling around in the undergrowth. We've got some Snow Trolls skulking around also, much harder to hide their heft, but they're somehow managing it. We've got some Bolgs Champions here, so the high-end unit of Misty Mountains Cavalry, so the Wound Raider going a little bit more heavily in for this sort of thing. We shall have to wait and see if it ends up paying off. We've got some Moria Halberds in and amongst some standard Goblin Infantry once more. Snaga Skirmishers in support, obviously basic Javelins, but may very well be entirely necessary against the level of quality that the attackers are bringing to the table. We've got Cave Trolls, we've got some White Oak Fearmongers at the back. Obviously, with their level of quality, they're going to be much more up to the task than the Moria Halberdiers are holding the line, but they can still be outranged by enemy pikes. Plenty of Moria Spearguard, plenty of Heavy Goblin Crossbows as well, which is good to see. That's another one of the Misty Mountains tools, which is going to be at its best against the Dwarves and Mountain Orc Berserkers as well. Plenty of hidden units here in the trees, hoping to engage in a little bit of ambush warfare, which is going to give this side of the battlefield a much different feel, I think, to the main settlement area, which is going to see the more traditional siege play out, at least right from the start. Of course, the Wound Raider can resort to that sort of thing later on as well, if he wishes, but I may make a little cut. It depends really on what this cavalry does, but without further ado, let's get this show on the road, shall we? So, utilising these mounted throwing axes is going to still be very possible, even if getting out into the open field with your cavalry is going to be very difficult if the dwarves simply do their due diligence and put pikes and spears in the way, which is going to be far easier on this side of the map than it is the other, but obviously rejoining fairly quickly here. I don't imagine the dwarves are going to take too much time actually to start this assault. The only thing that may take a little bit more time is the dwarven advance over here, and it is also rather interesting to see that a lot of map creators tend to have their own little quirks, shall we say. And this one, very similar to the very last battle that we saw, is kind of a lopsided siege to start with, where the player over on this side of the map starts further back and in more of an open field kind of position, and can then retreat back into the settlement, quote unquote, which is kind of a little bit more so in the corner. So clearly this is one of the ways in which the Wound Raider does make his settlements. Also rather interesting to see some slightly more tropical plants here in and amongst the snow. The second snowy north map that we've done in a row as well, which is in stark contrast to the still very warm conditions that I'm currently in. But Erebor victorious that time, leading the defenders, or being a significant part anyway of the defenders' victory in that one. Can they do the same on the attack? Both the Erebor armies in the middle as well, so Ered, Luin will have to be the ones to take care of business on the flanks. Warriors of the Blue Mountains moving forward. I mean, the temptation must have been there for those Bolgs champions to follow through on that charge. This is only line infantry after all, and it is rather densely packed, although javelins and other such units maybe here. Iron for Hammerguard are on the way over as well from Erebor, which makes a little bit more sense to utilise them to try and cover an advance from Ered Luin. I think slowly but surely Frost Spears of Azagal here. A very unique kind of projectile unit, this. Handgunners are really the thing which you would say they're most similar to in terms of what they actually do, but it's not as if their projectiles are truly like devastating. They don't rip through units with reckless abandon. I mean, the Barrow Wights here, I really do prefer the new Barrow Wights model, but this is exactly what they're going to be good at, withstanding a lot of punishment. And the cross spears will be trying to do that. I mean, the Barrow Wights still represent a real conundrum for most forces to go up against. The dwarves should be able to defeat them in the long run, but it's one of those units which make Angmar such an awkward faction to fight against. There's a lot of trolls in behind here as well. We saw in the very last battle replay the best way to deal with trolls, and that is you need the right kind of infantry unit to be on the front line to deal with them, and there are armour-piercing shock troops in the Ered Luin roster today, so they will be the best bet. And there, it's going to be the archers just in behind. The marksmen of Thorin's Halls going after unprotected halberds. They may not be the most important unit in the world to Angmar's chances of winning, but they're very easy kills for Ered Luin to pick up here, so I'm a little bit surprised actually that Angmar are simply allowing this to happen. Surely they have something like GUNDABAD Guard to be used as a covering unit. Bolg's champions moving in behind. Hammer Guard should really be keeping tabs on them. It's a rather long column actually that the Warlord is working with here. There's a few units, interestingly enough, well, a couple of units of Ironfoot Warriors and Erebor Legionaries. So Erebor sending over a little bit of support here to help Ered Luin on this flank. But the Hammer Guard, well, do the Bolg's champions simply ignore Ered Luin and instead try to go directly for Erebor? I don't think they do. They're now going backwards, perhaps with the worry that they could end up getting cut off. And ultimately I do think Ered Luin are probably a better choice of target to go after. Those crossbows from Erebor make them far more difficult to try and deal with. If you loiter for too long, it's a fairly easy task for them to do an awful lot of damage to you. Back go. Well, actually, this is Scourge Raiders from Medexa joining up with the Bolg's champions now, so a decent cavalry force, and I would be a little bit concerned if I were the Blue Mountains over here. You need to make sure that your forces are a little bit more consolidated than this, I think. Otherwise, if the defenders are feeling bold, they could start trying to pick you apart. But so far, still the only real engagement happening over here. Barrow Wights are still hidden. And more marksmen of Thorin's Halls trying to shoot into the side. They will be hitting the Barrow Wights, even though they are hidden, of course, but the main targets, I think, once again, are these rather fragile halberdiers. So just trying to pick away at the strength that they still have. Meanwhile, Frost Spears shooting directly into the GUNDABAD Guard as they try to close the gap. They won't be able to quite make it. Throwing axes being used as well, and that will be fairly effective against the Frost Spears. Meanwhile, it is going to be the Stone Hewers that are on the front line. Unfortunately for the Blue Mountains, though, that's also a unit against which the axe throwers will be very, very effective. But in melee terms, a dwarven unit with a two-handed axe should be able to crunch through that mostly stolen gear from the GUNDABAD Guard. Although I have to say, actually, the GUNDABAD Guard, I don't know whether they've been reverted to a previous version or whether the dwarven armour variant of them is now an armour upgrade, because these are all decked out in purely orcish gear. They don't have any of the stolen shields or helmets from dwarven weapon caches. The Stonehewers are in. Wardens of Thorin's Halls are also getting in here as well with their dual axes. Witchram Pikemen, however, will make for a pretty damn effective front line alongside the GUNDABAD Guard, and pikes are a concern. The javelins now coming in, so the dwarves responding appropriately to this. So Tommy getting things underway over here a little bit ahead of his allies, but I think he does have the opportunity to. Reinforcements have been sent over to the flank as well to help defend against Ered Luin on the other side, so it may actually be at the right time for Erebor to start trying to make a play through the middle as well. As much as it can be intimidating to go through the largest entrance. Ered Luin pulling back and maybe trying to consolidate. Again, I'm always in favour of trying to make the battlefield as big as possible as the attackers, though that can be a little bit more up for debate when it's the orcs against a high quality force like the dwarves and the orcs are on the defence. It can be worth your while to try and constrict the map depending on the spread of quality that we're looking at. We shall see. Meanwhile, these Witchram Pikemen doing a good job in melee terms. You can see actually the Stonehewers have fallen away pretty quickly. A combination of being caught on the end of those pikes and especially those throwing axes, but The tables are very much turned in that regard now, though. The javelins able to hit the Witchround pikemen consistently. And each volley, a few more of them fall away, and as soon as they lack the rigidity to keep the line held, they can try and crush through there. The unlocalized placement text with the flags on their back. I mean, that's a bodyguard tier unit if ever I saw one. The Barrow Wights reveal themselves. Warriors of the Blue Mountains. The first one's in. Again, I don't really know. The Barrow Wights have taken a bit of damage at the hands of those frost spears and a few straight arrows, but oof. And there the Barrow Wights going crazy again. This sort of low mass that the Barrow Wights have make them a very unpredictable kind of unit. It's going to be difficult to keep this line organised though. The Halberdiers won't be too pleased by that, but plenty of units here, including some of the Spear Guard of Thorin's Halls. See how the Barrow Wights do now. And then, over here, a little bit of a counter-attack from Angmar. The Scourge Raiders moving forward, and then the Trolls as well. This could be a bit of a problem, actually, for Ered Luin, because we have already seen how devastating a mass blob of Trolls like this can be, and a single unit of spears, even higher-end spears, like the Spear Guard of Thorin's Halls, are not going to be enough to stop them. Archers and Frost Spears will be making the attempt to whittle them down. Wardens of Thorin's Halls may be a little bit more well suited for dealing with the Trolls. They're still not high damage enough for me. The Stone Hewers, that's much more like it, so Ered Luin able to respond in the appropriate manner. Dwarves here in the middle, slowly making their way forwards. Ironfoot Warriors trudging up to the main entrance. I mean, surely at this point, Goblin Infantry skulking forwards from the Misty Mountains. Ered Luin moving in and forming up really a fair amount of tactical geometry, as they know that the orcs and goblins are going to break from the tree lines. Throwing axes raining down now. Wardens and marksmen the main target, which from Scourge Raiders were always likely to be kind of an awkward unit to deal with, because throwing axes are so deadly, and the fact that they can hit and run like this is a problem. I mean, you can try and chase them into the trees if you want. The crawlers looking very mutant-like. I mean, obviously, as a unit like this, they're not going to be able to defeat the Spear Guard, but they will stand in the way and allow the cavalry to recycle itself. The Spear Guard continue to move forward, and then there's also a unit of Wardens over here as well, but now the Snow Trolls are moving forward, so I don't know. They've readied themselves here, the Dwarves, and they are going to be able to use their projectiles, but again, those javelins weren't able to be used. For all of the setup that the Warlord went through there, I think that was not the best initial start to this engagement, and when you find yourself on the inside of being surrounded like this, it's always looking a little bit dodgy. And the Misty Mountains certainly don't lack for numbers, so any gaps that are seen, they will be able to take advantage of such things, and this is where it is actually going to be very important that Hidden sent over a few units to help reinforce this position, because it means they're going to have a few more numbers to work with as this ambush gets fully underway. Crawlers scurrying across the landscape, Ironfoot axe throwers and Erebor legionaries, and this is another big factor in this battle so far, especially the throwing projectiles. The javelins and the axe throwers over here, they haven't really been able to use much of their payload at all, which is a real problem. You really need those damage spikes to be doing the business. The High Thanes pulling out their axes. They're obviously going to easily be able to kill the crawlers, but once again the crawlers are just here to stand in the way, be an annoyance. There's a few units of dwarves as well which are kind of just scattered, separated from their allies. The Wardens of Thorin's Halls over here, for example, again they will be able to fight their way out of this situation, but it's just a little bit messy. Just a bit. Archers of Thorin's Halls also in melee. I mean, here the Snow Trolls, Guardians of the Blue Mountains over here, are not going to have what it takes to beat all of these trolls all on their own, and the power of the trolls combined with the numbers of all the goblins around them is proving to be too much for this Ered Luin front line. Here in the middle they're doing a little bit better, which is interesting because this is also where the White Uruk Fearmongers are. You'd have expected them to be a little bit more on it, but alas no. There's also Snaga skirmishes, so the javelins are also being used to good effect. I mean, sallying out and being a little bit more aggressive as the defender can pay dividends on occasion, but it is a risky move. But They've gone for it here, the defenders, and the numbers of the Misty Mountains make this a little bit less of a problem than it could otherwise be, and indeed going for more choke pointy kind of engagement probably would have favoured the attackers here, so you can certainly see why they've decided to try and do this. And then the Frost Spears doing the business as well, which one Scourge Raiders now able to charge in. Interesting. Meanwhile, here in the middle, Erebor going to try and make something happen, but the heavy goblin crossbows are already in place. We already know how devastating crossbows can be, and unfortunately for them they're also going to have to deal with yet more of Angmar's Barrow Wights here. And they're going to need to be willing to move in with a little bit more gusto than this. Again, they're a little bit too stretched for my liking with dwarves. They're moving simultaneously too slowly and too quickly. Very weird kind of situation this, and now Iron Axe Thrower is getting feasted upon by the Scourge Raiders, which did manage to escape ultimately from this position over here. I mean, let's see what's going on with the Blue Mountains, now forcing their way into the Barrow Wights position. Once again, it's the Trolls, this mass blob of Trolls, which we know how effective they can be now. We know that they're not indestructible. Preparing for that eventuality. I mean, it's a fairly even engagement over here in all fairness, because this position on the flank has seen the Blue Mountains consistently gain territory. And across the two bridges over here, it's been a little bit less clear which one pikemen running in the face of the Frost Spear fire. Stone Hewers and Warriors and Frost Spears. I mean, the Trolls are going to do a lot of damage. The Barrow Wights are going to stay standing, but in the long run, with that little bit of extra quality that they do have, Ered Luin may very well be able to squeak out a narrow victory here. In the middle, though, they do still have reinforcements here, the Orcs, but I mean, it's not as if they're planning on retreating anytime soon. There goes the Ered Luin general over on the flank of the Warlord, but the Orcs, I think, are really front-loading their defence here. They're not looking to retreat further back into the settlement, and I don't think they should, based on how the initial engagements are going. They're gaining enough from these front-line positions, and they also have all of their reinforcements already in position. And those crossbows are going to be the main problem. The Ironfoot pikes could have been an issue, but if they continue to get shot like that, not so much. Over here, meanwhile, I think this is probably the key area of the battlefield so far, simply because this ambush slash counter-attack slash sally out that the defenders have engaged in over here seems to have borne fruit so well. There goes Tumahai's general over on the other side, so one general apiece lost. If it's just Barrow Wights and Trolls left, though, Angmar are in limited danger of that being the difference between them routing and them continuing to fight. Defeat a distinct possibility for the Crawlers still. And just having a look, taking a survey of the situation on the whole, Misty Mountains certainly have more left to them. Not a huge amount of Dwarven resistance left. It's not as if the Misty Mountains haven't taken losses over here, because they certainly have, but looking like they could have a W on their hands. Crawlers move forward. I really like the way the Crawlers move. Gives them a lot more personality. Again, more charging. So far, the defensive cavalry has also been a good decision to bring. The Scourge Raiders, both at range and at being used as a blunt instrument to charge into enemy positions, have been very much worthwhile. These Ironfoot Warriors are routing, so all Erebor support over here has been dealt with. I mean, it'd be interesting to see what the Wind Raider does with what remains of his Misty Mountains army now. Does he try and move around and surround the dwarves in the middle, or does he retreat back through the settlements and simply reinforce the front lines? I would prefer to see the former, actually. It's not a hugely impressive force that he's going to have left, but it's going to... I mean, it would be a real problem for the dwarves if they got stuck over in this position, caught between a rock and a hard place, most assuredly. Meanwhile, Spear Guard, very depleted, many of these units now, but the Barrow Wights starting to fall away. Of course, in melee terms, they are very much a tar pit. They're not really going to be the best at dealing damage quickly against some higher quality dwarven units, and is going to harm them. Frost Spears getting into melee now as well. Still a fair amount of Barrow Wights over here. The unlocalized placement text. Dual wielding axes, they're still healthy enough, and surely this will be the end. So Barrow Wights pretty much all gone. The trolls, since the last time we came over here, very quickly melted away. Summon tools in the background there, so again, you can always tell when the trolls, kind of like Berserker class units, when all of their hit points are gone, they actually do fall off pretty fast. Scourge Raiders trying to force their way through. I mean, they don't really want to hang around in melee for too long against this dwarven infantry. More and more of them will fall away, and we've seen how effective the cavalry can be so far in this battle, so you want to save them for later. Good opportunity perhaps to get some more damage done. No. Can charge in over here, but they did see that, so the Spear Guard did turn around. That will be enough to do some damage off the charge, but the Spear Guard will also reciprocate that damage in kind. Not a huge amount dead actually, but they are shaken. Morale of Angmar looking a little bit suspect, and yes indeed, we are going to see the Misty Mountains. Swordsmen over here as well. They are going to try and surround the dwarves in the middle, and all of a sudden this engagement over here is becoming the one of most importance. It's been a rather by-the-books kind of engagement so far, but Erebor are going to need to try and make something happen, I think. Otherwise, like I said, they're going to find themselves surrounded at some point. And the longer they stay here anyway, stuff like the crossbows, and now we're seeing the trolls start to get committed, the Drake Broodlings, if there are holes in the line, can really start to make your life miserable. The trolls are actually pulling themselves off the front line now as well. Bit of armor piercing from the Mountain Orc Berserkers being added, Blackback Mountain Berserkers. Another very powerful unit, another unit which will be well suited for trying to deal with the level of quality that the dwarves have in their mid-tier. Snarger Fire as well, Sons of Durin on the way forward. I mean, Sons of Durin will be very good at warding off the trolls, especially when you consider that the Misty Mountains trolls are not quite as strong as the Angmarim ones. So they will fall away pretty fast in the right circumstance. Still more javelins. I mean, this I think is the main issue for the dwarves here. When you consider the positions that the crossbows are taken up, when you consider the javelins are being used effectively, I don't really see how Erebor's manpower holds itself together in the long run if this continues. They'll be doing slightly better on this side, but even over here they're being delayed fairly significantly, the Barrow Wights being one of the main reasons for that. Goblin infantry moving in as well. Fully upgraded. 2 levels of armour upgrade on them now. A combination of the standard and heavy Goblin infantry units. There's a lot of Snarger. I mean, there's a lot of low-end units over here. Quality is definitely not the issue, especially when you can see the Dragon Slayers, Ered Mithrin, moving in. So the dwarves, will they be able to make something happen here? I mean, they could also get a little bit of support from Ered Luin when Tommy, if Tommy is victorious on his side, but again, that won't be a huge amount of relief. While he may indeed win over there, it will be a very close fought affair. More hits from the throwing axes. Obsidian Guard now in melee as well. I mean, the fact that the crossbows are largely gone is probably the saving grace for the attackers for the time being, because now it's becoming a little bit more about that quality in melee, and that's of course where the dwarves are going to have far more good fortune. Meanwhile, more reinforcements actually came over here. Medex is sending over some of his own Angmarim troops to try and stifle this advance, and that will be a success as well. With his own trolls coming across, they will actually be able to defeat the Blue Mountains completely over here now, so Tommy will end up being destroyed. Looks like the Blue Mountains over on the other side, but this is a lot of reinforcements over here, which may well have been needed to deal with the increased level of Dwarven quality in the middle now. Stuff like the Obsidian Guard and the Dragon Slayers will be able to do far more damage against the caliber of units that we've seen in the middle. So maybe this is a little bit overkill. Warriors of the Blue Mountains. Still the trolls. The bane of the attacker's existence. Not so much actually in this battle, but still Warg Riders. Bringing from the Orcs to the Misty Mountains, a nice rear charge there. Dwarves mentally tough, of course, so not going to rout quite so easily, as they're opposite numbers today. Orc fellas, a bit of extra armour piercing, when they already have the big advantage in melee. Their own defensive shortcomings are less important. 3 frost spears. Ready aim fire. And after the barrow wights, interestingly enough. They're not going to last much longer now. Guardians of Kharndoom see them. Meanwhile, the Dwarven crossbows are now in position as well, so how the tables turn, Snaga archers, less of a concern. Drake Broodlings getting right up in here, although I think they count as... They're technically a cavalry unit, I think, so the fact that they charged into pikes was suicidal. Not a great decision there. And then Dragon Slayers will push their way through, they'll rip their way through even the barrow wights. Line for axe throwers. More pikes moving forwards, and the Sons of Durin leading the way with the Dragon Slayers, even the mighty Witch Realm Hammer Guard struggling under this. I mean, you can see when the dwarves get going and when their quality can really establish itself on the front line, you can see how the orcs struggle. Even a faction like Angmar, which is fairly well renowned for its own heavy infantry and their ability to crush enemies underfoot, when it comes to this level of opposition there, they find it far more difficult. But now the surrounding action is going to start taking place. The Wound Raiders Misty Mountains army is now ready to surround. Not able to make it quite in time, well, not able to make it in the kind of time frame that they would have wanted, but still, the crossbows, unfortunately for them, are getting attacked by trolls in melee, so that is something that the orcs will be very happy about. 9 for extra as well. They really kind of need this support here, the orcs. They need everything to be a bit efficient. I think that's Winged Swordsman's general. So the Misty Mountains will be the kind of faction that will suffer from the loss of their general. Many of their units are now wavering. Everything they have left anyway, which admittedly is not actually that much. Medex's Angmar forces that finished off Tommy need to get back over here fairly quickly, and the Wound Raider also needs to get his surviving Misty Mountains units into the fray as well. If they continue to be isolated from one another, then Erebor's quality may very well be enough to see them over the line here, the attackers. There goes Medex's general. Interestingly enough, the Dwarven general is also right over here. Angmar's general falls, so when those units do arrive back, their morale may be a little bit more questionable. I think the first half of this battle, when you looked at it, you would be thinking the defenders were on top, but as the second half of the battle has marched onwards, especially here in the middle, the dwarves have definitely challenged that assertion. Scourge Raiders are wavering as soon as they get... I mean, charging in here would be absolute madness. And madness it is. There are pikes here. Again, just like the Drake Broodlings, the Scourge Raiders will get absolutely demolished by pikes, and indeed they end up routing very quickly. Wasn't even the best of charges, it was a bit clumsy, a little bit slow. The Obsidian Guard moving back, who, I have to say, on that front line, the Obsidian Guard performed very, very well, as you would expect. The extra melee defense from being a dual wielder against the lower quality goblins from the Misty Mountains. Exactly the kind of foe that they have been trained to fight. Meanwhile, the rear guard, there's only one unit of Iron for Pikes back here actually that have been tasked with holding the Wound Raiders army back. I mean, it's all well and good when it's just a single unit of crawlers. Easy enough for the Ironfoot Pikes in that regard, but they're going to need a little bit of extra help, I think. How much extra help can they afford to be given, though? They are going to have to split their focuses a little bit. I mean, as we go back, there's a lot of routing back here. I mean, the further reaches of the settlement are something we're not really going to be seeing, interestingly enough. There's a lot of rather complicated terrain back here that we're not going to be seeing, but like I said, when the Orcs really made their decision to front load, they did the right thing by doubling down on that, I think. If they retreated, they would have lost far more. And like I said as well, going for narrower choke point warfare is probably not actually the play for once. I think that would have played into the attackers' hands, and let's not forget, in a 4v4 the attackers army to army are going to have the higher quality, more money to spend, and that's where Erebor will be hoping they can be victorious here as we march ever closer towards the final 10k frames, and the final phases of the battle will take place here in the shadow of Sauron's statue. The foothills of the mountains of GUNDABAD. Will the dwarves manage to reclaim them? Or will they be forced away once more by their old enemies? Ironfoot Pikes still holding on to this front line. They're trying to force their way through here, the Misty Mountains. I mean, they are having some success, I suppose. There's still some trolls. Bolg's Champions, that's a pretty scary unit to have in the late game, 17 of them. It just depends on whether or not they have the room to actually charge into their foes. Snow Troll falls. Dragon Slayers are in amongst them, so that's not too surprising. But more trolls are on the way, and Angmar as well, with halberds and Guardians of Khan Doom. So this is a fairly substantial force here that the dwarves are going to have to try and find the strength to deal with once more. Some of their units getting left behind as well. Sons of Durin getting overwhelmed. It's a close run thing, this. Ironfoot crossbows getting into place, interestingly enough, forming up a position effectively as the defenders now, getting onto that same place where the heavy goblin crossbows were making their lives miserable earlier on. Reforming themselves, Ironfoot axe throwers, crossbows, plenty of skirmishers. Don't know how many of them still have ammunition or not, but the trolls aren't going to allow them to fire anything they have left anyway, at least not all of them. Obsidian Guard consolidating themselves with the Ironfoot crossbows and going after the Orc Fellas. I mean, the Orc Fellas will be exposed pretty badly by a unit with the kind of stats of the Obsidian Guard, and they're also shaken, so morale is pretty much a constant worry. Some heavy goblin crossbows do manage to get in behind the Ironfoot Pikes, but even so, I mean, they've managed to surround, at least partially surround, this unit of Ironfoot Pikes, but it's not with anything substantial enough to the point where the Pikes are actually all that bothered. They're going to need something with a little bit more heft to recharge these Ironfoot Pikes and to allow what remains of these goblins outside. The Defender announcer still seems to think that they have the clear edge. I mean, it's highly possible that amount of power that Angmar is still bringing to bear is not insubstantial, but I don't think it's quite so cut and dry. The Bolg's Champions are of concern, but they're also getting shot up pretty badly by the crossbows. I think the crossbows being in the position they're in, honestly, is pretty key. They're going to try and go after them. I mean, it's all well and good, but there's only 6 of them remaining. They're going to die in melee, and also his general falls, so that's going to be the Womb Raiders' army on the verge of total defeat, I would suggest. Troll Angmar still stands tall among his comrades. I don't personally see how Angmar overcome the quality that the dwarves still have left. I mean, there's still 38 Dragon Slayers and 2 units of Obsidian Guard in various states of repair, but that level of quality, in addition to the numbers of axe throwers and crossbows they have around them, who even in and of themselves with their armour values are not the easiest thing to kill, especially for slightly more defensively minded units like the Guardians of Khan Doom. I think The Barrow-wights are over there, but I mean, what are you going to do? Dragon Slayers again, those Dwarven Bodyguard units, I think, have been what ultimately done the damage. The high-end units as well, the Sons of Durin. Just in general, Ered Luin had a slightly more torrid time, but once again, just like in the last battle, it looks as though Erebor are going to be able to lead the forces of good to victory against the forces of darkness. It's not completely all over just yet, but like I said, crossbow support, bodyguard tier, oomph. I don't see how the defenders can muster something that will beat them, and also, I mean, this unit of pikes over here was actually successful against the Womb Raiders' army, routing after the loss of their general. I don't really see what they have left either. Having a look. Yeah, the attackers 2% ahead, and that's not counting the units that are fleeing in typical Orcish fashion. Dead Snow Troll. Yeah, and Angmar Halberds also fleeing now as well, so what is left? Do the defenders still have like a secret force that they're going to reveal of hidden units? It's not impossible, but we're going to have to keep an eye out for them. Barrow-wights, of course, don't rout, so you're going to have to kill them off in their entirety. Sons of Durin will do it. I mean, there's only 15 Barrow-wights remaining. There is also that healthier unit from Hertugenhai, but one unit of Barrow-wights is also not going to be enough to turn around the defenders' fortunes here. Pikes on the way forward again. Ironfoot pikes. Been very, very effective in this battle indeed. Guardians of Khand Dûm are running. Whatever happened to the Witchers? Was I like... Maybe we completely missed them. Maybe they were in the middle here and Erebor simply shot them down with crossbows. I mean, they certainly didn't cause the level of devastation we would normally expect, otherwise we wouldn't be seeing an attacking victory here. I could have sworn one of their 2 units of Witchers in one army? Or am I just going mad? It's entirely possible, I suppose. Obsidian Guard, Dragon Slayers. Again, that armor piercing on the Dragon Slayers is a real difference maker. Especially against a force like Angmar, and I mean, Angmar, of course, the faction everyone loves to hate. Very effective at what they do, generally speaking, but on this occasion I think people will be quite glad that they've been taken to school, really, by the dwarves, in terms of what their units can do versus one another. Erebor showcasing their qualities once more. Ered Luin struggling a little bit more, but then they had a fairly tough encounter, tough and bruising encounter there while the Barrow-wights move forward. I think that must be the only unit they have left, right? And it's just a case of them slowly trudging into position. The Barrow-wights, after all, do shamble along incredibly slowly. Not the unit that you want if you want to rapidly respond to a situation. I mean, 100 Barrow-wights, but again, Obsidian Guard. Very well suited for dealing with them, as are the Dragon Slayers, and other such units as well will be around to offer support, so there is no real threat. Very close battle this though, once again. It could have gone very differently. Like, I still think perhaps the key moment in this fight was when Medexa sent over perhaps too many units to help finish off Tommy's flanking force. They got what they wanted out of that ultimately, but I have to question the necessity to send over all of those units all at once. I think having more strength over here wouldn't have allowed Erebor perhaps to build up the lead they did, but of course the other way of looking at that is Erebor would have won anyway with the level of quality, but we'll never know now. It's all conjecture at this point. So this is it. 1 unit remaining. Barrow shambling forward in column formation. 160 of them, but also bloodied. Rough treatment at the hands of the Frost Spears of Azaghal earlier on. throwing axes being used. I mean, in all fairness, that's one thing I think the defenders did do quite well. Trying to get in and amongst the enemy skirmishers using their own ranged units to very good effect. And this has been a battle of mixed fortunes. I think the defender ambush on the flank against Ered Luin was very well executed. They ultimately were able to kill Ered Luin despite it being a little bit more closely fought on the other side as well, but ultimately their victories on the flank ended up being at the expense of their victory in the middle, and then Erebor simply have too much quality left. Well, Kingdom Under the Mountain as they are now called, but of course Erebor will forever be what most people know them as. The Barrow-wights, I mean, they're going to last a little while here, as perhaps you would expect. This is where the witches pop out, and against this blob they singe the entire Erebor army. I can't possibly imagine what the reaction would be to that. I can only assume that Erebor shot them down early doors, in the middle here, when we simply weren't looking. The throwing axes continuing to do their thing. The Ironfoot pikes, very key also. Just in general, Erebor, when it comes to this kind of battle, the way that they're set up is very, very powerful. The only thing they're really missing, just in case it comes down to it, would be a long-range, heavily armoured skirmisher. That's where they do fall down a bit, but I'd rather have, I think, crossbows in this kind of battle, because if you can get them into position, it doesn't really matter. That level of stopping power is always going to be worthwhile. And then they also have the throwing axes as well, so again, as far as the siege-focused factions go, though, all three of the Dwarven factions are going to be pretty effective at what they do. The throwing axes continue to rain down. I mean, considering there's still, well, effectively 4,000 frames left. And that is a good point as well. The reason the announcer was probably so confident is the amount of hit points that the Barrow-wights have, and that affects, of course, how the computer sees the balance of power. But that is not going to be the case for too much longer. The battle does indeed seem to have turned against you. Yeah. I guess it does go to show how resilient the Barrow-wights really are, though, if they are going to survive for all of these frames that remain. I mean, everything that the battle has to offer at this point is pretty much within this one area. Around 300 or so dwarves will be left standing at the end. They're going to need some more reinforcements, I think, to press the expedition further into enemy terrain. I do like the structures that are sort of sticking out of the mountains. Ironfoot. Defeat is almost a certainty, but still around 100 of them remain. The Obsidian Guard push their way into the middle of them. I don't think that actually treated the Obsidian Guard all that well. There's only 6 of them remaining. Victory is a distinct possibility, amusingly enough, for the Barrow-wights, but that will change around, of course. I mean, pikes. Too much for them to handle. I think it will have to be a ×2 affair, this, won't it? There's only so much I can say about these ghouls slowly being worn down by Dwarven warriors. Obsidian Guard running out of steam a little bit. Slowly and surely. What is going to be the final percentage difference then? 3%? Yeah, that makes sense. And it is technically another attacker victory, although much like with the Rudauer capital siege, I do wonder if, because it's the forces of good on the attack, especially because it's Angmar on the defence, which people often see as the pantomime villain and want them to lose, I feel as though this will be appreciated a little bit more. And it's also the second battle in a row where we've seen trolls dealt with well, and I think really this ends the debate early about what trolls actually represent in this version of the game. They are more useful than they were, but I think that's a good thing, because trolls were a bit underwhelming in the last version of the game. now they're far more useful, but as long as you are prepared for them, you can still deal with them in much the same kind of way. You just can't throw any unit of infantry at them and expect them to deal with them in the end. But here, the dwarves proving too much for them. Defeat seems certain. Only a military genius can win this battle. I think it's going to take more than a military genius. It's going to take the Witchers if you have them. And I do not believe you do. Blackhawk Engineers are way up there. What are they shooting at? They're trying to bank their shots? Weird. I did see that other unit of Barrow-wights as well on the way. 24 of them. Just the game of whack-a-mole against Her Tumahai's hidden units at this late stage. Says they're still fighting. Three remain. Swords held aloft. They are charging. They look pretty goofy when they're doing that, I'm not going to lie, but keeps the battle alive for just a little bit longer, or will it? There's actually not that many frames left. Is Her Tumahai going to admit defeat? Possibly. Oh, they're just going to die off more quickly. I think these guys got ravaged by the frost spears a little bit more so. Yeah, he admits defeat. One of the only time you'll see the Barrow-wights rout is when a player admits defeat. But there we have it. The dwarves win, and it was hard fought, but you have to say it's probably deserved in the end. The way that they were able to deal, the Erebor players, with that situation in the middle was very, very good. Ered, Luin on the flanks, I think in both their cases they were slightly unfortunate perhaps. I think the Warlord having to deal with that kind of battle is obviously the opposite of what the dwarves were tooled to try and do in this fight, which is to take an entrenched position in a siege instead of trying to withstand an ambush from multiple directions. But it is what it is. Ultimately, that is to the defenders' credit that they were able to make the battle like that. Tommy did pretty well actually against Angmar initially. It was very hard fought against Her Tumahai. It looks like he looked like he was going to win narrowly, but of course Medexa's reinforcements put paid to that. But like I said during the battle itself as well, that could have proved to be the thing which gave Erebor more momentum in the middle with less Angmaran units to have to try and deal with. But given the level of quality, would it have made a difference? I don't know. The battle was close enough to the point where minor tweaks could have been enough one way or the other to change the outcome. But let's see what did the damage for the two Misty Mountains army. Bolg's champions were a worthwhile pick. I think probably not as much as the Witchram Scourge Raiders. We won't be able to see their kill counts, but I think they were the more important unit of cav because they were charging in, doing the same job as the Bolg's champions, but they also had those throwing axes which were used right from the beginning, right to the point where all of those cavalry units fell. The Heavy Goblin crossbows did okay, but maybe not as much damage here as I was expecting, but then they were part of the ambush, not part of the central defence. We've got the Trolls, which did well, and considering the nature of the ambush, the Trolls were always going to do very well in that situation. And the rest of the forces, 149 on White Orc Fearmongers as well, one of the better units for facing off against Dwarven units in particular, but you can see not huge kill counts as you'd expect. It's the Misty Mountains against the Dwarves, very much quantity versus quality. Winged Swordsmen on the other hand, Heavy Goblin crossbows doing much better over here. I mean, they were in a very nasty position, and it's actually to Erebor's great credit that they were able to withstand this level of damage and still gain the momentum in the long run. The Trolls did well again, but not dominating, as we said during the fight itself. Snaga Skirmish is doing well, so again, those ranged units, the Trolls, and a few units get it well. Mountain Orc Berserkers, yeah, armor piercing as you would expect, but many of the regular rank and file units not getting many kills at all, as you would kind of expect against the Dwarves, but still, that's where the big difference was. Some of these units did very, very well, but the rank and file struggling greatly against the against the higher average quality that a faction like Erebor is obviously going to have in comparison to the Misty Mountains. Angmar getting more kills on average by the look of it, but again, didn't matter in the end. the winners are going to be, or were, the Dwarves. So a big thank you to the Wound Raider for sending these last 2 battles in. A big thanks to all the players as well for being a part of them. Long may this sort of thing continue, as I've mentioned as well, and as I'm sure you've noticed with the more pickier nature of what I'm going to be doing from now on. Themed battles like this and patch previews and all of that, they're going to be pretty much the only thing I'm going to be showing replay wise. I'm not going to be going for just any old replay anymore. I think I do need to be a little bit more choosy with what I'm doing, and this is the kind of thing that I am really looking for. So yeah, hopefully this will continue long term. Always good to see more people making new maps and the like. As far as what's going to be coming up next, however, we will be making, I think, the last trip to the old patch. I think we will be waving goodbye to it with a battle on the old version of Khan Doom. I think that's the plan for now. There's also a few other things I can do. I've got another Silmarillion replay that I want to be doing fairly soon as well. Again, the return to the old patch and the Silmarillion replay, those are the kind of things that will be happening on Wednesdays. But obviously the Saturday slot is going to be reserved for things like this, so we'll see. This is also the last replay though that I am recording before another trip away for work, so this won't be out until like the second half of July sometime. I'm still speaking to you from way back in the month of June, but yeah, we'll see. During the time periods where I'm away, things can obviously develop as they do, and we'll just see how it goes. But yes, big thank you to the Wound Raider once again, big thanks to all the players. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.